This Congressman, I want to bring in my panel now, MSNBC political analyst Anand Giridhardas, who is the former assistant chief of addition to former chief of protocol, former assistant chief of protocol Nick Schmit, former State Department senior advisor Nayyera, and MSNBC contributor Dionne. And I'm going to start with you, Anand, here at the table. We have at the moment 2 out of 4 key diplomatic posts in East Asia unfilled. We can just put the graphic up. We do not at the moment have an ambassador to South Korea, of all places, which could be a target if North Korea were to attack. And we do not have an Assistant Secretary for East Asia Pacific Affairs. We have a State Department that is currently not well led. Most analysts have said that Rex Tillerson isn't even doing a good job leading the State Department, not only not filling posts, but not exhibiting great leadership. And yet he is sort of the person that the American people are looking to try to do some diplomacy against his own boss.
What's remarkable is, with apologies to Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small duo of thoughtless men who deserve to be committed can end the world, because it may be the only thing that ever will. If Trump was a kind of startup pitch, he'd be Harvey Weinstein, but with nuclear weapons. I mean, what we're seeing is a man who is tremendously personally wounded, not healthy, not whole. Fine, there are a lot of people like that in the world. But Trump is now sitting with our nuclear weapons and using B-2 bombers and the fate of the world as his therapist. Our B-2 bombers are not his therapist. We can't resolve his daddy issues through tweet storms that may lead us into nuclear winter. And so when you have someone who is so wounded trying to use the prospect of war to distract from his own demons and from Russia investigations and everything else, it's very scary. And just one further point. I think we're starting to get to a place where we are so divided as a country that our adversaries, whether it's Russia or North Korea, know that even if they threaten us, even if they threaten great violence against us, our internal, it'll become partisan. Our internal divisions are such that we won't actually be unified. That Independence Day moment from the movies actually won't happen. If the aliens were to come now, we would actually just fight over the aliens amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think foreign countries are starting to, intelligence services are picking up on this about us. And it's a very, very dangerous thing.
Well, then let me turn to Nick Schmit on that, because the State Department is tasked with trying to deal with our relationships in the world. What must the career people at State be thinking now?
Look, I think the State Department is filled with thousands of dedicated public servants. We have civil servants, foreign service officers working all over the globe at our embassies and missions, trying to advance the foreign policy goals of this administration. I think it must be incredibly difficult for these folks to do their job and carry out what the agenda is that they're looking to, further our bilateral relationships with other countries, and then all of it can go out the window with one tweet. So I can understand why morale is low. We're seeing that reported from folks that I've talked to who are still there or have left. So it's an unfortunate situation, and I think the tweets by diplomacy is reckless and dangerous.
Well, Nayyera, because the president is essentially saying that he doesn't want there to be diplomacy, that he sees diplomacy as weakness, and that he wants Tillerson to be, quote, strong. Donald Trump did a very interesting, maybe bizarre is a better description of it, interview with a sycophant, which is what he likes to do, Mike Huckabee, on his show on TBN. And here he is talking about the North Korean leader using his favorite silly nickname.
You have a lot of things out there on the horizon, including North Korea and Kim Jong Un, or as you like to call him, Rocket Man, which I thought was a great moniker for him.
Yeah, for almost 30 years, through numerous administrations. I mean, if you look at President Clinton, he paid billions of dollars, gave them billions more, and the day after the agreement was done, he was, meaning his father, was, because same thing over many years. But same attitude. I think this one's the worst of the group. But they started doing what they were doing, and now we got to a point. This should have been handled 25 years ago.
And when you hear this should have been handled 25 years ago, Nayyera, what do you hear him saying should have been done 25 years ago?
Well, I don't think he even knows necessarily what should have been done 25 years ago, other than his typical go-to answer, which is crush somebody and drop bombs on them. And what he forgets is that we actually already were engaged in the Korean Peninsula. It was called the Korean War, and it didn't exactly go well for many of our veterans and for the United States military. And technically, we have an armistice. There is a militarized border between South and North Korea. So instead of trying to understand anything about history, anything about how policy actually works, Trump leads by his own personality issues. And that is actually what it looks like he's looking in the mirror when he talks about North Korea and Kim Jong Un, and looking in the mirror to the point where his own people could be suffering, and his not interested in solving the actual problem and learning how you deal with these challenges. He'd be perfectly comfortable having his own people suffer, whether it be in healthcare, whether it be in light of hurricanes, as long as he gets to poke his finger or poke somebody in the eye who he feels is acting up in the country, in the world. That corollary to that is the other people he's poking in the eye happen to be our allies. So the United States people suffer. South Korea, Japan, there was a nuclear test of ICBM missiles over Japan that North Korea conducted earlier this week that made many cities in Japan evacuate because, frankly, they have suffered from nuclear war. They understand the implications of what's going on here. That has gotten lost on someone like Donald Trump, the very real implications of how people will suffer because of his behavior. Not only is it lost, doesn't seem like that's going to change.
And EJ, we're coming up on the deadline that could be ominous, maybe not. October 10th happens to be the anniversary. It's the founding of the North Korean Communist Party. It's also the same day that campaigns will begin in Japan for Parliament's lower house election. We know that the North Korean dictator is nothing if not into symbolism and nothing if not paranoid about the intentions of the United States toward North Korea. Most analysts say his primary goal is simply self-preservation of the regime. I wonder if you think that there is anyone in leadership at the State Department or the White House that understands the gravity of what we're talking about here, because Donald Trump doesn't seem to.
Well, I think that there are several tragedies here at once. One is that Tillerson seems to have some idea of this. So does Secretary of Defense Mattis. Tillerson has kind of undercut himself by putting a wrecking ball to his own department. But you also have a real tragedy here. It's not just that a president who has power over nuclear weapons shouldn't send out light tweets or make light statements like the calm before the storm, as if this is something on, his old TV show. It's that Americans used to be very united on North Korea. There's nobody, left, right, center, apolitical, who doesn't doubt that this regime is cruel and crazy in North Korea. And what Trump does is, even on an issue where we were basically united as a country, we knew this was difficult, we knew we had to work it through carefully, he divides us by, in the Huckabee interview, by sort of laying all the blame, or almost all the blame, for this on Barack Obama. As someone said, Trump can live without friends, he can't live without enemies. And so when you have a difficult situation for the country and a president whose first instinct is to divide us when we don't have to be, that puts us in a terrible position to deal with what every serious person on foreign policy, no matter what their views are, acknowledges is a really difficult problem to solve.
And, Anand, we're sitting here having this grave conversation. I don't get the sense from Donald Trump that he sees it as anything other than entertainment. Is that an unfair characterization?
He's a small, shallow man. We all know that. In some place, he probably knows that. I think the issue is not his character in a vacuum. It's his character in this job. And I want to say, he's not the only person in government. The fact that you have people like Rex Tillerson, or on other issues, the Gary Cohns of the world, people who very clearly from all the reporting do have strong reservations about him, do think that he is a problematic president, do think that we are not safe in his hands, but refuse again and again to speak out publicly. We know from past history, from other countries' history, that those bureaucrats who follow orders and stay silent and do not tell the public what they think about the dangers we are facing never come out well in the end.
Yeah.
And these people are not just disgracing themselves or becoming jokes. They have an obligation right now, Rex Tillerson, everybody else, who thinks we may be in danger because maybe a moron is running this country according to their own alleged language, have an obligation to either resign or speak out or tell our troops a different message than the president's telling them. But these people are cowards.
We're running out of time, but I very quickly want to ask Nick Schmit, do you anticipate seeing resignations from state as a result of what you just heard from Anand?
You've already seen it, Joy. Since the beginning of this administration, there's been hundreds of top officials, mid-level officials who have already resigned because they don't necessarily agree with this administration, or frankly, they don't like what they're seeing in terms of the disorganization, the lack of process and management. So, yeah, I do think that that will likely continue, and I think that that is unfortunate for our country and the national security interests of the country.
And I'll end with you, Congressman. When does Congress step up and act? Because Congress does have the power to rein in this president if they want to, but I don't see much of an appetite on the other side of the aisle from you to do that.
That's right, Joy. You know, many of the president's advisors, it looks like they are helpless to stop him, but we are not helpless in Congress. Our founders imagined a abusive or reckless executive, and they gave Congress the ability to step up. And so the question for Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell has to be, what will it take? How far does this president have to take our country to the brink of war before they step up and we step in? We have that ability. I hope it comes soon, because those two individuals have been around for a long time, and they know that what is happening right now on every level, from the military to the domestic policy, is just wrong. And we are actually capable of doing something about it.
Up to 2 million people could die. You know, it's sobering
and we
numbers.
can stop that. We can stop that.
Absolutely. Well, here's hoping that the Congress will step up and do something about it. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much. Anand Giridhardas, Nick Schmit, Nayyera, thank you. EJ Dionne will be back later in the show. And up next,